at the National Security Agency and commander of the Air Force Technical Applications Center. In addition to his 15 minutes presentation, Jim would also moderate the panel discussion that would follow for 60 minutes. So may we all please welcome Jim with a round of applause.
Thank you, Naveen. Okay. I want to give you a look at lessons learned from a couple of the big breach investigations that we've done over the last couple of years. I do want to note right up front that these lessons learned are probably not going to be something new, but hopefully they're going to reinforce the things that you already know and really emphasize the importance of doing things right, because it's going to show the cost if you don't. Just a couple of statistics, but we really want to get into the actual breaches. This is a recent study by the Ponemon Institute, shows the cost typically per record lost during breaches. What's really scary is when you start losing tens of millions of records, this cost goes up dramatically. Here's the real challenge. We've all put a lot of money into, in particular, technology to defend our networks, and unfortunately, the attackers are still getting in. So what are the lessons? What is important? I should note that one of the things that I haven't highlighted here, but one of the lessons learned that we've seen from a number of these breaches is that too often organizations are getting only about a third of the value out of what they pay for a lot of these technologies. Classic case was the Target breach. They had bought the FireEye technology, but had not implemented it well. The technology detected the breach. The incident responders didn't really react to it because they weren't trained right. And once again, good money spent on technology unfortunately did not stop the breach. Okay, I'm going to walk you through two breaches that occurred a couple of years apart. The really scary part about both of these breaches, as you see from this green timeline, is that those breaches went on for more than a year before they were detected. It lets the hackers in today's environment in particular really deeply embed themselves in the network. Typically what we are finding is the amount of time that it takes us to do incident response and forensics to really investigate and document a breach. Typically we're being asked to spend about the same amount of time remediating the network, fixing it so that the breach won't happen again. So on these big breaches where the hackers really burrow into the network, in some cases it takes 3 to 6 months to thoroughly investigate the breach, document all of the data lost, document all of the attackers' techniques and procedures, and then it takes an equal amount of time to remediate it. Okay, in this case, the attacker gained access through poorly secured wireless at 2 retail stores, then jumped to the data center, did a massive FTP download, got a lot of unencrypted credit card data, came back a few months later, did another download, and in this case, by now, the PCI DSS rules had changed. The data had to be encrypted, so the attacker got a lot of encrypted data that wasn't of much value to them. Unfortunately, they were still able to maintain network access and ultimately established a VPN into the network. Because the data was encrypted, he had to figure out a different way to get it. So he started experimenting between that May time frame and October. the attackers started experimenting with different capture devices to capture the data before it was encrypted. We see then that finally in the October timeframe, the attacker gets to what we call an operational theft system, where he was now routinely pulling about 45,000 credit card transactions every 3 days out of the network. Unfortunately, at that point, the victim brought in another, quote, leading cyber forensics team. That team spent 6 weeks looking for this breach and couldn't find it. The credit card companies had told the victim, we've got a fraud vector, it looks like you. That's why they brought in a forensics team. The whole time this forensics team was looking, the attacker was in the network stealing 45,000 credit cards a day. Finally, in December, they brought us in. Fortunately, I had an individual in Boston, got him in the data center. Within about 2 hours, we found the breach that these other guys couldn't find in 6 weeks. Why is that important? You can imagine the fines from the credit card companies for 45,000 cards lost every 3 days during that 6-week period. But the real lesson learned here, and again, we did terminate the breach pretty quickly. Ironically, we worked very closely with law enforcement. Law enforcement actually asked us to keep the attacker alive in the network because this was the best live investigation they had. We had to figure out a way to change the credit card numbers so that as he was stealing them, they were not valid credit card numbers, but he didn't know it. Okay. Next breach, several years later, now the credit card transactions are encrypted end-to-end through the transaction process. In this case, the attacker gained access through SQL injection into 2 vulnerable web pages. Amazingly, typically you see on the top, typically we see the attackers put in backdoors very, very quickly. In this case, they were so confident that they didn't even put in the backdoors until about a month later. What they did do, though, is they put in memory scrapers or memory capture devices to very quickly try and capture the processes in the servers that were decrypting, processing the credit cards, and immediately re-encrypting them in memory. What we see then is they went through 3 generations of malware. And here's the real problem if you don't have robust network security monitoring. It lets the hackers actually develop malware, test it in your network, develop the next generation of malware, evaluate the results, test it in your network, so that by the time they get to what we again call an operational production theft or generation 1, now they've got some very, very nasty malware that is tuned directly to your operations. We see them deploy pretty quickly a second generation of malware, and then we lock them out of the network. Okay, lesson learned out of all of this: robust network security monitoring is probably the most important thing you can do. We've been doing network monitoring operations for governments, for military organizations. We've been saying for 25 years, there is no network that a determined hacker will not get into sooner or later. The key is detecting them once they get into your network and then removing them. Okay. Again, as noted before, Fidelis has a booth out here, booth number 7. Go see our technical guys, and they can really walk you through our capabilities. We believe that technology, although we are a product developer, will not solve the problem by itself. You need a combination of people, expertise, services, and technology to solve this hacking problem. I thank you. Any questions on those examples? By the way, this is actually part of a presentation that I typically give. I gave you one lesson learned, that's network security monitoring. Typically, if I get an hour and a half or so, I'll go through 10 different lessons learned. I'd be happy to come back at your invitation to brief any of your organizations on the lessons learned from, these were primarily credit card breaches. We do advanced persistent threat attacks. We do technology attacks, intellectual property breaches, you name it. But thank you. And with that, I guess we will transition. If I don't have any questions, we'll transition to the panel. Thank you.